Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and in this video, I am going to share some tips for downsizing. Many of my clients every year are either relocating somewhere else or moving into a smaller space. And I think each time some of these same logistical questions come up. If you're somebody who's lived in your house for a long time, or maybe you've accumulated a lot of things and you're moving into a smaller space, this information is going to be extremely relevant for you. I'll say before we get into some of the points that they are fairly simple. I don't think that the answers are complicated, but I think that it's important that there's a straightforward path to follow. So often the complicated answer with 35 or 40 points is the wrong answer to the question. So what I want to do with this video is take what I've learned and observed from multiple situations where somebody is selling a house or moving out of their place and moving into somewhere smaller and giving some really practical advice that I think is applicable to every situation. My first thought here, number one, is that you need to have a vision for the future and where you're planning to go. I think a lot of people start to consider downsizing and selling their house, and they know they want to sell and get something different, but there's no plan. So before you can really create a solid plan around what you're going to do and execute a solid plan, you need to have a plan. So I think if you don't know where you're headed, it's hard to make a plan to get there. So as somebody who's considering downsizing, I think it's really important that you know where you're going, whether that's into a smaller house or a condo, or maybe you're going to rent for a while, or maybe it's something completely different, and especially if you're moving out of the area. But I think knowing where that is helps with the rest of the steps. So I'd say you need to have a vision for the future, and I would say more than just an idea in your head, I think you need to have plans executed on that next space. So whether that's signing a lease or making that purchase if you can, but at least having a clear path forward so you can reverse engineer the steps to get there. Number two, you need to decide what you want to get rid of and what you want to keep. I think we talked about step number one in knowing where you're going, and that's going to help you plan around what it is that you're going to keep and get rid of, because you know where you're going. You know what that space looks like, hopefully, and that will help inform, well, what fits in that new space, what doesn't fit in that new space. And anytime you're moving from somewhere bigger to somewhere smaller, you have to make some tough decisions about what goes there and what doesn't. So you may need to sell things. Some people will hold an estate sale where they can sell some of their more valuable possessions and do it all at once, so it's a little bit more simple. Others will give things to family members or donate to charitable organizations, nonprofits, thrift stores, things like that. And other times they'll go about trying to sell things on their own or giving to family members. But I think in this stage, you need to decide what it is that you're going to keep. And then once you know that, then you figure out the rest of it. And that's where I think establishing a plan, that would be my third step here, around these things. So you know where you're going, you know what you're going to keep, and what you're going to get rid of. Now you need to establish a plan for how you're going to do all that. And that's where some of those logistical items I mentioned come into play. Who's going to get this stuff? How am I going to get it to them? How am I going to sell it if I'm going to sell it? How am I going to give it if I'm going to give it? And then logistically, how am I going to get what I have to where it needs to go? Number four on this list, and I think this is really important to sit on for a sec, and that's the idea of having a realistic timeline. I think this applies to everybody, but more specifically to people who've maybe lived in their house for a long time, or maybe you're a little bit older. I think we can get really emotional around all of the things that we have and that we accumulate, and I've seen this in many situations, and it's normal. It's completely normal. I think it's important that we have a realistic timeline and that we don't rush it so we can do it right. And I think that's the key here. So when we have the plan, I think we need to factor in what it's going to take to get there in budgeting an appropriate amount of time so that we're not rushing through some of these steps and some of these things that are really important. And I think how we hand off possessions and how we handle all of that is extremely important. So establish a realistic timeline, and this needs to be something that's flexible, but also something that you can work towards, because when we have a goal and we have a plan to accomplish that goal, if we stick to it, we can hit it. The final point I want to make on downsizing, and this is my 5th point here for the video, and that is the idea of consulting with experts. I think when you're going through something that you've never gone through before, it's really important that you're asking for advice and that you're seeking wisdom, because people have gone through this before. And as a real estate agent making this video, I have walked with a lot of people through different transitions, whether they're relocating or they're moving into a smaller space, and sometimes it's a family member who passed away, and we need to help get rid of the possessions or help with the transition from the family member's home into helping the family sell the home. So there are lots of different ways that we have been involved in these transitions and these downsizing opportunities. And I think there's value that a real estate agent can bring to selling a house and prepping a house for sale. I think there's also value in connecting with people like estate sale companies or professional organizers. Those types of people have connections that can help with all of this. So I think consulting with experts, it doesn't need to be a real estate agent for this process, but I think if a house is involved, it makes a lot of sense to involve a real estate agent in some way in this process to help with connections, but also to help with a lot of these different things. Because when somebody's downsizing, they typically have things they need to get rid of. They're trying to decide what to get rid of, how to get rid of it, what the timing looks like. They might have goals around selling the house. And so when you're reverse engineering something and you're trying to work backwards from a goal, which maybe the end goal is sell the house, then you want to make sure that you're consulting with the right people and having conversations with the right people to make sure that you reach your goals. As we began this conversation of downsizing, I mentioned that these tips are super straightforward and simple, but it doesn't mean that they're easy to execute. So as I think through and as I read different things about the 47 ways to maximize your downsizing or how to declutter your house in 30 million steps, I think it's overly complicated. And I think when we can simplify things, it's a lot easier to take action. So hopefully these steps and these tips that I gave in this video are helpful for you and beneficial for you. I know it may seem simplistic, but sometimes simple is better. Thanks so much for watching this video where I shared 5 tips on downsizing your living space. I hope this video was valuable for you, and if you made it to the end, I trust that it was. So if you want to connect with me specifically on selling a house, maybe you are in this situation where you want to talk more tactically about your situation, I'd love to bring some value to it. And if this video was valuable for you, I'd appreciate it if you'd share it with somebody that you know who could benefit from it.